So complete this as you will, and I hope you will say out loud what you're thinking. I am responsible for, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I am responsible for
My children.
my children, myself,
future-
what else?
Our
My
family.
future generations, our people.
Okay, a variety of answers. So good. Okay, even though I said there are no right or wrong answers. Okay, so we heard the good of others. We are responsible for ourselves for sure. Second, I have to be able to recognize that certain facts are true, even though, I'll say it again, I have to be able to recognize that certain facts are true, even though
I don't like them.
I don't
Good.
accept them.
I don't accept them.
I don't like them.
Okay. They challenge my convictions.
They're beyond my control.
Ah, interesting answer, Stephen. Okay.
Not what I believe in.
Next, the real problem of the internet is
Garbage in and garbage out.
okay,
Too much information.
Too
Big
fast,
Lots of lies.
too fast. People don't have time to think before they respond.
thank you. Sarah, how are you?
I'm well, Bracha, how are you?
Good, okay. She gets that because her daughter was Batya's, one of her favorite teachers for 3 years at Chat. Okay, Toby Bondar, okay.
Information is controlled.
Okay, and I think Simone might have hit
Too
what
much
Zach
time,
says.
too much time, not face to face.
All right, well then, with that, I can say goodnight. What Zach says is, there is no real way of discerning truth from lies. And the last question, politics is about blank and not about blank.
Oh, boy.
Ambition,
Oh,
but not necessarily truth.
Politics is about
Nice,
getting
Rita.
reelected and not about doing what's good for the people.
Okay, now I don't have to come back next week. Okay, all right, so thank you. And let's now delve in. Early on in his book, Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, it's funny, I have a problem saying that because just like our sages and other teachers of ours, they haven't said something that's going to be in the past, but they're still saying it to us. Just an aside. So early on in the book, he introduces us to two characters. The first is an atheist who goes regularly to church or to synagogue, perhaps because of a spouse. Two, the second character is a believer who prays alone. Of the two, Sachs asks, who, according to studies, would be more likely to volunteer in a soup kitchen? The atheist who goes to shul, or the one who davens, but davens alone? Who will go to that soup kitchen and volunteer? Anyone?
The atheist.
The atheist.
All right, I guess you figured that's, but Marlene, why?
He believes in being connected to people. Then even though he doesn't believe, he is going to be amongst the kahal, whereas the other person is just looking towards himself. He's praying for himself and is not reaching out to be part of a community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sachs tells a joke that he is speaking to an atheist, and the atheist says, I don't have much time. I'm going to shul with Markowitz. And he's surprised. You're an atheist. Why are you going to shul? Well, Markowitz goes to talk to God, and I go to talk to Markowitz. Now, that's no so far-fetched. What is, in fact, one of the names of a synagogue? Beit Knesset. What does Beit Knesset mean? A house where we come together. It is. It is. So this is Sachs' train of thought regarding this. Religion creates community. And this might sound funny coming from Rabbi Sachs. Moral philosophy, by the way, was his first love. It doesn't mean when he became a rabbi, he suddenly became immoral. But he then goes on to say, religion creates community, but religion, as we just heard, often is less about believing than belonging. And community, therefore, creates altruism. Altruism turns us away from ourselves toward the common good. So, yes, it's the atheist. But what happens to altruism and sharing when the phenomenon of community, the common good, isn't necessarily a priority? Now, as an aside, I need to say, as we go on, you might not grasp what Sachs is saying, not because you don't understand it, but because it's foreign to you. What do I mean by that? He is going to make a case that for the most part, we live in a world where community is on the decline, and altruism because there isn't enough community. You're blessed with this community and probably others, and I know most of you, and I believe you are altruistic and care and give in different ways. So if you say, what is he talking about? That's good, because that says something about you and it says something about the people you hang out with. I hope not these days. Okay, so Sachs mourns the decline of community, both on the personal level, and we belong to more intimate, a little larger communities, but also on the national level. And boy, does he hit it on the nail in his timely discussion of most national communities and politics. Now, I'm going to be very blunt here. I've been here 2 years now, so my English maybe isn't that good. Do I say does politics today, or do I say do politics?
I think do.
I had it, you're an Israeli, what are you giving the answer? Notice none of the Canadians said that. Riva, you're a writer, what do I say? You're on mute.
I'd say does politics.
Okay, well, that's what I'm gonna say. Okay, look it up and let me know.
Well, does is because it's plural. You're saying politics. So does goes with the plural.
No,
No, it just is does. That's correct linguistics.
all right, I don't wanna. So, politics. Does it nurture a feeling among its citizens that they are all part of some nation, united, all heirs to its history, responsible for one another, ultimately sharing in the pursuit of the common good? Let me ask my questions, because I see already people gesturing. Or have our politicians divided communities into us and them, representing their respective parties, and that's legitimate? Do they give us a sense that they are committed to working together despite their differences? Sachs said that it's unforgivable when he would watch in England disagreements between cabinet representatives, ministers, in front of the public, that so irked him. Have your disagreements, work it out, and then come before the people if you are looking for the common good. Do, he continues, the politicians or us, the citizens, acknowledge things that unite us? Or do we focus only on what divides us? Are our prime ministers, presidents seeking, as I think Rita said earlier, victory or truth and solutions? Where are the times when these leaders used the word we? Pay attention. He says, if you look and listen, you will hear that there's an increase in these leaders' vocabulary and their use of I when they are talking to us. And what that means is they're more interested in introducing us to their personality rather than to policies. It's more about the leaders than the nation. Now, we could spend the next 5 classes talking about this. I shouldn't, but I'm going to. There are a couple of us here, a few of us from Jerusalem right now, but you're all in Canada. Were you thinking that we're talking about Israel and the country below you? Or is there a sense of this in your country as well? Any of it? Bev, I see you nodding. Why?
There seems to be a division even in Canada,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you know, among a lot of the different politicians, and a lot of breakdown. So you know, it's everywhere in the world. It seems that you know, people are more interested in putting other people down, and anybody who disagrees with you is unacceptable.
Anybody want to respond?
I
Agree,
think she's very
confirm?
right.
Rita?
I think she's very right. You only have to turn the television on and listen to the politicians. We're in a crisis, and yet you turn on where the premier of the province is presenting something, and a member of the opposition stands up, and even though he's explained it 6 way to midnight, she challenges him, and brought it into such a sense yesterday that he lost his cool at her. He's trying, I think, hard to pull things together. She's going in the opposite direction, not because she necessarily believes he's wrong, just because she feels she has to take an opposite stand. Working together is not a harmonious issue for her.
And that's very sad, believing that they should all be looking to do something. Linda? You're on mute.
Guys that said that democracy isn't perfect, but it's the best thing we have. And, you know, democracy requires politicians, and that requires parties. It's not perfect, but what is the alternative? You could have a dictator, and then you don't have to worry about politics.
No, but there have to be times that, of course, democracy is crucial. And by the way, nowhere does our tradition say that we should not disagree with each other. Quite the opposite. We have the paradigm of Hillel and Shammai, and we are meant to follow in that. But so much so that even when we follow Hillel, the Talmud brings in the other opinion. But it seems to us, I know here, that there are times, despite democracy, that because of the times, health, life, that you have to sometimes make decisions. And interestingly enough, a review of Sachs' books, this book, Morality, said that in the edition that was published in the States, he actually added, it was already Corona time, and he adds in there some paragraphs about hoping that people will realize that you've got to do what's best for the community. And it's not a time to disagree. That on the side. Stephen.
Well, an assumption was just made that I strongly object to. The assumption was that we have democracy. First of all, what is democracy? And I questioned very strongly that we do not have democracy today.
I won't allow that. Okay. Arlene.
I think one the problem is that we're living in a period where the cult of personality has become so strong that people are rejecting the common good and looking to the personality. And I think that Donald Trump is a prime example of the cult of personality. I mean, if you really looked at him and said, is he going to work for the common good? There was no way from his past history, and certainly from his history as a president, that you could say he was working for the common good. But he was such a strong personality that people bought into his message.
Okay. I'm not going to allow us to get into that. Riva, thank you.
I think that something that's been lost in the topic of politics, in the evolution of politics, is the ability to engage in civil discourse. That it has disappeared, and now it's a free-for-all. So it's almost like Fight Club. You can get in there, you can say anything. It doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it's defamatory. You are allowed to say it in the name of free speech. And that, for me, is the greatest loss in the political sphere of everything that has happened. And it did begin with I think it did begin with Trump. It may not have begun with Trump, but it certainly was enhanced.
Okay, Sachs speaks to this issue that there have always been disagreements, but at least there was integrity and dignified. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
This idea of community was put into Sachs's mind by Harvard sociologist, perhaps you'll remember him, Robert Putnam. And he got to Sachs through his book, interesting title, Bowling Alone, America's Declining Social Capital. Bowling Alone. Putnam noticed that there was a loss in membership in many secular and religious groups, organizations, and in fact points to reduction in all forms of in-person social intercourse. And this is before Corona. That overall, people are doing many things that they used to do with others and are doing them by themselves now. Now, he uses bowling as an example to illustrate this. Do we have any bowlers here? Yeah, okay. All right. You can be democratic and bowl. Okay. Now, he says, although the number of people who bowl has increased, the number of people who bowl in leagues has decreased. Now, what's the problem with that? If people bowl alone, what aren't they doing? They aren't participating in social interaction. You can picture a bowling alley and you sit, here's the alley, and you're sitting kind of in a semicircle. And while it's not your turn, you're chatting with the people you're there. Well, if you do it by yourself, you're not having that. A simple, but he feels a rampant example. And therefore, the subtitle of Sacks's book is Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. Now, Sacks laments the move he refers to as from we to I. Now, this is what they call a movie spoiler. He trusts, however, that there will be a return to the we, for this isn't the first time that we've made the I a priority. It has happened before, and we've gone back to the we, even if it's only for a time. And he gives some fascinating examples of the move from the we to the I between the 15th and the 17th century. People began to write autobiographies. Artists started painting self-portraits. He mentions Rembrandt. Rembrandt repeatedly, over 40 paintings, 31 etchings, and 7 drawings of himself.
You couldn't afford a model.
People lived increasingly in private rooms. I find this one incredible. A French psychologist, Jacques Lasson, argued that a sense of an I closely corresponded with mass manufacturing of glass mirrors. Isn't that interesting? And then he brings in to the picture as well intellectual reflections of going from we to the I. The Reformation, Lutheran Reformation, asserting the primacy of the individual's encounter with God and not via the church. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, each proposing a profoundly personal, subjective vision of the moral life in which choice was of the essence. Nothing absolute, subjective now. The I, not just the principal character in the moral drama, but also the one who writes the rules, and so on. So he concludes that morality, which you have and must have if you have community, but if you don't, morality no longer a shared code. The moral imperative is expressive individualism. Become ourselves. Again, a French political commentator, Alexis de Tocqueville, in the 1830s, reflecting on this I focus, coined which term? Anybody know? Individualism. Note, Tocqueville explained that he did not mean by this egoism. When he says somebody is individualist, he doesn't mean that he's selfish or has a big ego. No, what it means is he separates himself from the masses and leaves society to take care of itself. Now let's fast forward to today, where Sachs suggests our moral vocabulary involves other types of words other than individualism, but along the same lines. Autonomy, self-actualization. Give me two others, both beginning with self.
Esteem.
Self-fulfillment.
Okay, self-fulfillment. I heard somebody say self-esteem and
Self-
self-expression.
Self-awareness.
Yafet. Now, just a word about self-esteem. You remember the psychologist Abraham Maslow? Many of us took courses. So he was famous for his concept of the hierarchy of needs. And you begin at the bottom, and that's your most basic food and shelter. And you go all the way up the ladder to actualization and self-esteem. And that became a movement. And it was felt those who have self-esteem would fulfill their potential in a way that people without it wouldn't. Sounds logical. However, Maslow, in the months before he died, began having profound doubts. He was carrying out experiments, tests on those with high scores of self-esteem, and he discovered the following. Those with very high self-esteem would come late to the test. And when they got there, they were either forward or condescending, less respectful to the tester. And what he began to feel is that they actually reflected antisocial behaviors. Now, we all know self-esteem is incredibly important, but he's obviously talking about people who took it to an extreme. And together with him, Carl Rogers, who's known for the practice of unconditional positive regard, also had second thoughts. He felt that practicing this encouragement brought on self-indulgence. And eventually Rogers wrote to people who were applying to work in his institute, he wrote, less self-esteem, please, and more self-discipline. Now, agreeing with Maslow, Sachs notices from down to earth reality, different indications. He looks at the most popular pop songs and says, if you look at them, you'll see that words like we and our are on the decline, as opposed to now what we have, I, me, but even more disturbing, he says, if you listen to some of the songs, or what some people call songs, they're expressing anger. Now, we don't want to overgeneralize, but anger, aggression, hate. You hear words, kill, hate, damn, as opposed to words like talking, sharing, because there isn't that same social interaction that brings on these positive feelings. Now, what's responsible for this? Today, we'll look at what we've already referred to, the social media. Like us, he knows that we're living in an age where communication technology, well, we wouldn't be sitting here right now if it wasn't for this. And even people who are in the same country, but can't be together, thank God for this. It's a wonder. On the other hand, we're not seeing enough, and somebody said this before, face-to-face interaction. And again, before we had to put on masks. Now, what that means is, what's missing if you don't have face-to-face interaction? What's missing? Well, he says you're not really able to focus on the other. If you're not really there, you can't see the body language. You don't know the real tone, face to face. And he goes on and says, and I think somebody hinted at this also earlier, social media has an uncivilizing impact. And he calls it the disinhibition effect. Now, what does he mean? If you've read the comment thread of an article on online newspaper or follow a Twitter storm, I'm trusting that you people are with it enough to even know what those terms mean, right? Yes, okay. You'll know, Sachs says, that it's the equivalent of handing out to thousands of people megaphones, inviting them to shout their loudest, rudest, as Riva said, and crudest commentary on anyone and anything. Now, why is this able to happen on social media? For 5 reasons, he says. There are 5 features of social media that makes this possible. It's anonymous. It can be. It's invisible. It's not done in real time. I say something, you don't hear it right away. There's a gap. It's unregulated. Maybe they'll figure out how to regulate it. I think they're working on it. But primarily, it is not face to face. When I use social media, I am also presenting myself. Think about it. And some people go crazy in posting things that, why do I have to see that? Or they joked about the selfie. Are you there for us to see the leaning pizza, or are you blocking it and taking the, right? So in social media, you're presenting yourself, but you're not encountering the other. And without otherness, you're not going to have a chance for community, and therefore morality. Is it needed? Obviously, yes. I don't know why, I'm thinking now that most of the people that I'm quoting are French. The French philosopher Manuel Levinas believed, and I'm quoting, moral obligation is born at the moment when we encounter the face of the other. The face speaks to me and thereby invites me to a relation. in order to look at somebody face to face, to be open to the other, you do have to be open to not lowering your self-esteem, but saying, I have to look not just inside of me, but I have to look outward. Psychotherapist Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, advocate for people searching, man searching for meaning. He could have easily let his fellow campmates look inside themselves and just fall apart. What did he do that gave them strength? And if we're talking about in a camp, then alachat kama v'chama, us who are in the free world. So what did he do? He gifted his fellow campmates with the strength to survive by taking them out of themselves. Taking them out of themselves. And you hear these incredible stories of people under that oppression doing for others. Now that ultimately helped them as well, but that's the way to survive. And Sachs spends a lot of time on that. If you think that you're doing yourself a favor by being inward and just caring about yourself, no. Ultimately, it will be if you are involved in relationships and caring relationships and communities. You make yourself part of a we, and that ultimately enhances your I. And Frankl, my second quote, being human is always directed and pointing to something or someone other than oneself. And this self-transcendence, Frankl asserts, is achieved not by concerning yourself with your self-actualization, but by forgetting yourself and giving yourself and focusing outward. Sachs urges us, by the way, to understand what I just said a moment ago, that focusing outward is far from denying our own individual value. It enhances, it benefits. We feel enlarged, he says, by doing good, more so than perhaps by how we do materially. Now, this brings us back to the decline in face-to-face relationships, which explains why there is a hesitancy in focusing outward. If people aren't meeting face-to-face, then others become strangers to us. And we've been taught not to trust strangers. So we hesitate. Now, lest you think that Sachs was pessimistic about reversing the we to I path, toward the end of the book, he describes a very heartwarming scene that gives him cause for optimism, and especially heartwarming to Canadians, very familiar with the story, a true story. And I'm actually going to read it to you. Gander, on the island of Newfoundland, was a small, quiet relatively unknown town of 10,000 inhabitants, far away from the urban centers of a hectic world, at least until September 11th, 2001. That day, following the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the United States closed its airspace to incoming planes. Those destined for one of its airports were diverted elsewhere. 38 planes carrying almost 7,000 passengers of 97 different nationalities were forced to land at Gander International Airport. A major humanitarian challenge had suddenly been thrust on the people of the town. The story of how they responded, we know, has become the subject of several books, and of course, that amazing musical, Come From Away. The passengers were exhausted, disoriented, and shocked. Some had been held on board planes for 28 hours while extensive security checks were made on their luggage. Many of them had no idea where they were or how to get in touch with relatives and friends to let them know they were okay. Yet almost immediately they encountered an unusual sense of welcome. Greeting them was a feast prepared by the people of the town. Local bus drivers who had been on strike immediately set their grievances aside to take the newcomers to the various shelters that had been prepared for them. People invited them into their homes so they could shower, refresh themselves. They provided them with linen and toiletries. Local fast food outlets supplied them with chicken and pizza. Chicken. Children were given toys. Those celebrating birthdays were given a party and presents. Newtel, the Newfoundland town telephone company, set up in front of its offices a bank of phones so that people could call their relatives for free. For the better part of a week, nearly every man, woman, and child in Gander and the surrounding smaller towns stopped what they were doing so they could help. They placed their lives on hold for a group of strangers and asked for nothing in return. They affirmed the basic goodness of man at a time when it was easy to doubt that such humanity existed. What made Gander a likely community to behave in this exemplary manner? What do you think it was?
They were a community to begin with. They, as people, they behaved that way normally.
Exactly. Being a small community, everybody knew everybody. Their face-to-face meetings were an everyday thing. And because of that, they trusted each other. Now, this might sound very simplistic, but it makes sense.
Yes.
It makes sense. Now, what do you do with this? We will next week discuss more of his suggestions of how we bring ourselves to create trust, community, and how our tradition helps us toward that. But as I began, is this something that you feel you see? Do you see that maybe it's not immediately part of your reality, but you know, we could be very lucky in how we live and who we're with, but is this describing in your opinion, the better part of the world that we are in? Your takes on what Rabbi Sachs is saying.